Welcome, 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 welcome to Oakdale. We are so excited to have you here today as we begin another day that the Lord has made, another day that He has kept us and blessed us. We are excited for this Men's Day weekend where we have a guest speaker today, Mr. Ramal Toon, and we want to use this time to get to know him, to talk about some of the exciting things that he's doing in the ministry and in the kingdom. So thank you all for joining us, whether you are here in person or you're streaming live with us. We thank you for being in community and in fellowship with him. I am Donnell Barnett, one of the associate ministers here at Oakdale, and we are excited. Mr. Ramal Toon, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing well, and thank you for having me.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I want to tell everyone a little bit about you. Mr. Ramal Toon is a public speaker, author, social entrepreneur, and an ordained minister. He is probably may not brag on himself, but magna cum laude graduate of Howard University and Duke University School of Divinity. In 2017, he founded and created Clear Story Education, a nonprofit that teaches communities about the importance of mental health and how to combat the stigmas associated with mental health. As an author, his latest book is titled, I Wish My Dad, The Power of Vulnerable Conversations Between Fathers and Sons. Thank you again for joining with us today. I wanted to sort of open up today to give people an opportunity to get to know you, to learn about your ministry and what you're doing. You, of course, will be speaking in our main service earlier today. So tell us a little bit about what's your story. Help us, what would you like us to know about you and sort of what you're involved in?
Yeah, so my story is grew up in a single-parent household in the Bay Area, California. Raised by my mom and served in the military for 4 years, Gulf War, Desert Storm, and then went on to attend Howard University undergrad and then Duke University for Divinity School, and spent quite a few years in Washington, D.C., and now reside in Atlanta.
All right, all right. I didn't know about the military connection. Hua to you. Part of your story is this concept of social entrepreneur. And I think that may be an unfamiliar, of course, people aren't familiar with the term entrepreneur, but what is a social entrepreneur? And help us understand a little more about that.
Yeah, for me, social entrepreneurism or social impact entrepreneur is basically a way of looking at doing well and doing good at the same time. Oftentimes people feel like doing good in the world is in opposition to doing well financially. And so for me, it looks like generating revenue, then making sure that resources are sent on to organizations that are doing impactful work in communities. And sometimes it looks like doing good in the world in the for-profit sector. Yeah.
So a bottom line that's different from just financial profit, financial gain, but a bottom line that also factors in doing good in the world.
Yeah, there's a deeper why to making money, right? There's a why of being able to realize that there is a responsibility to give back, to have a direct impact, a measurable impact in communities that changes lives. So for me, it's that making sure that there's this synergy between doing well and doing good. As God provides resources to me, I resource those who need that in order to do the work that they're doing in communities. But then it's also the work of solving problems in the for-profit sector as well. That we don't have to shun people with money and then find ourselves going to ask them for money to do good in the world. So it's kind of like overcoming that stigma of who gets to have some and why it's okay for them, and realizing that it's okay to have money as long as I realize that there is a reason for me to do good in the world.
Thank you for that. I know a lot of folks who are thinking about turning their ministry or their passion into things that will sustain them financially, but also keeping sight of what's of value to them. I thought, I just wanted to explore that to give people some context of thinking about it. You have a number of books, and I have a copy of your latest book here. I know that there are many people listening to us who have a story inside of them, who have even a book or several books inside of them. Would you tell us a little bit about your process as an author? Where do you find inspiration? I'm curious about how do you go from concept to putting pen to pad and ultimately getting your work out into the world. Help us understand a little bit about your process.
Yeah, it's very intricate. I think there are a number of things people don't understand about the publishing world. But I say the first thing for anyone who wants to write is to just start writing. Stop thinking, start writing. And do not look for perfection because there will always be editors. The goal is solid content, not perfection. Writing is just like art. Every artist who puts out a piece of work can always go back and look at it and see where they could add something or do something differently. And that's the way writing is too. It's a constantly evolving, it's a living, breathing document. The other aspect of it is write something that matters, that is solving a problem that people around the world are looking to solve. Is there something in your story or something that you do that solves a problem? What is moving in the publishing world today are books that give people skills. People are looking to either solve problems, grow in a skill set, and find a new way of being in a world that allows them to come alive. And so a book is very much a tool. And those are some of the key components. And the other thing is, where will you sell this book, right? Every author has to look at their ability to move the book. Publishers don't sell your book, they publish the book. It is the author's responsibility to get out and sell the book.
Thank you for that. I would imagine as we think about how God has positioned us to be uniquely talented and gifted, that within that talent, within that story, are opportunities to turn it into kind of practical things. To your point about books that help people, that give them tools, that folks may see some connections there and how God has used them to solve problems and then communicating that out to the world.
Yeah, that's an important part of it. Your writing has to answer the so what. Like, why does this matter? Why should I care? What value is it to the actual reader? What can they do with this content? Now, and that's, for me, that's through a nonfiction lens. But I think those questions can also be answered in fiction books as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, while we're talking about books and authorship, I really want to turn some attention to your latest book, I Wish My Dad. Would you tell us about the book? What is the central thesis? What's the main concept that you hoped to impart? What are some of the tools that you hope to share with people through this work?
Yeah, I think the real premise behind this book was coming to my own personal realization because of the relationship with my father, that the relationships between fathers and sons are oftentimes shaped through the lens of the father's story. And sometimes what we are nurtured into really doesn't serve the next generation well, nor meet the needs of the son. And this book is designed to let people know that they're not alone in their I wish my dad desires, and to show them ways to heal, but also ways to be better fathers and better just family members to the people that they love, to unpack those stories. And at the end of each chapter, there are takeaways written by a therapist. So it's not that every I wish my dad story or even completing that sentence is a bad thing. It's simply that there are lessons to be learned, even in some of the best situations that had moments that were so impactful on your life. They've shaped how you show up. And, you know, the first story, Ernest, amazing relationship with his father, almost enviable in some ways. But there was a tragedy that occurred that had an impact on Ernest's life in such a way that as a leader and even as a spouse, he moved through the lens of that pain point, not through the whole story and the beauty of what the relationship was, but the pain point would show up in his leadership and show up in even how he cultivated relationships. And so realizing that there are parts of our stories that we hold on to that really need to be revisited so that we can release ourselves from the things that don't serve us well.
Thank you so much for that. I think about pain points in our lives and how we may start with an idea of how to solve it, or may not even be aware that we have within us the ability to move past those pain points. And I see this notion of being fragmented in a way, that this sort of helps us complete the story, to tell the whole story, and with that story, use it as a roadmap to move past our traumas, our hurts, our pains into a space of healing, a space of progress in our lives. So, thank you for that. I wanted to read a little bit of just a little bit from the book that I thought was really compelling. It says, this excerpt: "I wish my dad." That sentence fragment grabbed my attention, causing me to pause and reflect. I came up with lots of different ways to finish the sentence. Finishing that thought allowed me to give voice to all the things that I had longed from my father. It gave me an outlet for emotions that I didn't even know I had. I wish my dad. Finishing the sentence gave me a way to be honest with what I had yearned for. As I reflected on that statement, that statement from the book, it made me think about, again, this notion of being fragmented, not only for our sons, but also for our daughters as well. I'm curious about, what have you seen show up in people's lives that there seems to be an incomplete sentence, if you will, from folks that you've talked to about their reactions to the book and so forth? Where have you seen these things show up in the stories that people have told you?
Yeah, I think that several of the biggest observations have been, one, people have been waiting for permission to give voice to their stories. That people have been carrying so much on their journey, but not feeling like there's safe space to have the conversation and give voice to it out of fear of shaming or guilt. Secondly, I realized like a lot of older adults buy books in droves. Part of it is because people are realizing like, yeah, I did live into a story of me that was shaped by my parents that didn't always serve me well. And now I'm a grandparent, and I'm showing up differently, and I want to learn the tools that will allow me to love in new ways. Another big one is when the parent is no longer alive. The question becomes, well, why bother? I'm not able to have the conversation, which assumes that there's no opportunity to heal the story of you without the opportunity to engage the parent. And they're learning that ways that you can heal. Your healing is not dependent upon someone else's presence. Your healing is dependent upon your desire to do your work.
That is, there's a lot to unpack there. I love this. You brought in elements of intergenerational connections. Certainly, there are many grandparents who are involved in their grandchildren's lives, or perhaps even raising their grandchildren, and trying to give them some context to help them move about the world in as complete a way as possible. You raised some other points about moving beyond pain points and so forth, and this notion that if the parent isn't there, that you can still move on because the focus is on doing your own work. Tell us more about this idea of doing our own work. What does that mean? How have you seen that show up?
Yeah, I think a part of it is not moving on, it's moving through.
Moving
right?
through.
You can move through, and what I mean by that is you have to revisit the story. You don't revisit the story to forget it, you revisit it to remember it differently, to detach who you are from what happened then, because you're not your past, right? You're not your pain. So you're still beautifully and wonderfully made in the image of God. So that is something that never changes. So how do you do the work of disconnecting how you feel about yourself and who you're becoming in the world from what other people said or did not say or did not do, and realizing that the love you deserved then, you still deserve now?
One of the things that I'm hearing is sort of this idea of changing our relationship with our memories. We may have one relationship with a memory where we might have been a victim or hurt or felt, a lot of pain associated with the memory, but going back to the memory and viewing it in a different way changes the relationship, where it's a part of our story, but not necessarily a defining point. Is that sort of getting to this point of moving through and reflecting on those stories and memories?
Yeah, it is. It's a part of realizing that sometimes we have a toxic relationship with pain. We justify why we still need it and the value it has to us. For some people, the pain of their past and their relationships is their why for the work they do in community, or the why they love differently. So they use a pain point as their anchor, realizing that you can choose to use love as your anchor too. And also recognizing that the pain point isn't a sustainable form of, moving through the world. It's what you're trying to heal in the world is the difference, right? So every healer is on a healing journey. And so in loving differently and looking back at the past, your why is connected to why you love better, not your being connected to why you're angry.
I hear an amen. And sort of this notion of, I love this fact of bringing about why, because it helps us to think forward looking. It helps us to think in a more purposeful way of moving towards purpose, as opposed to launching from a place of pain or problems or trauma. How have you communicated or translated these concepts or principles to people in sort of practical ways? Where might people hang their hat on some things that they can sort of take with them moving forward?
Well, the beauty of the book, I Wish My Dad, is that the stories are the tools, right? When you read this book, you are reading the real stories of these men and their relationships with their fathers and the challenges that they faced. Chapter titles like, I wish my dad didn't silence my voice. I wish my dad honored my value. I wish my dad was faithful to our home. I wish my dad loved himself more. I wish my dad put family over finances. And so through these stories, you're hearing what those experiences looked like in their lives, how they've been able to heal on their own journey, how they show up differently in their own families, and how they show up differently for themselves. And also, it's important for people to understand through getting those tools from the book that the love you deserved then, you still deserve now. And learning how to let love in from the people who are trying to love you the way that you've always deserved it. And sometimes that's from that parent, and sometimes it's from other people in your life. And at the end of each chapter, there are also takeaways that are written by a therapist. So the intention behind this book was always to give people tools, to have them reflect on their own stories. And as people of faith, looking at what in my story that I need to go back, revisit, and redeem parts of me from, right? Because in some experiences, they took something from you. They took the desire to love and be loved, and you live in fear. You can redeem that from that experience, to live in expectation of love rather than live out of fear. They took safety from you, and you can redeem your sense of protection and authority and autonomy from what happened in your past. So a part of it is going back and getting what was always meant to be yours, which is a fullness of life, to feel safe, loved, protected, honored, valued, to know that you have a great destiny, and to revisit those stories courageously in order to become your best self.
I can't help but you use the phrase "go back and getting," and it reminds me of the notes of the concept of Sankofa, to go back and fetch it, as it's often phrased. But this idea of going back to our historical origins, even in our own early development, and pulling out those pearls and bringing forward to think about our current problems and challenges and solutions. And I love this idea that you're bringing up of going back to think about what might have been robbed or stolen or incomplete, and redefining this relationship with those things to heal current challenges that we're thinking about now. This weekend is our men's weekend here at Oakdale, and we have had a decided focus on health and wellness with a particular focus on mental health. Help us, give us some thoughts from a men's perspective. We've talked about being stoic and macho, and I love this point that you made about giving and receiving love and having permission to do that. From a men's perspective, specifically, what would you say to the men of Oakdale and other men that are listening today?
Yeah, one of the things that I came to learn about myself, and then I started to realize was happening to other men around the world, is that we have been giving a model of manhood that doesn't serve us well. And if we really look deeper and look at the lives of the people who hand down these models to us, it didn't even work for them.
Absolutely.
And so this idea of be strong, don't cry, be tough, be a provider, was tied to a story of who people believe we should be in the world, but wasn't tied to a sense of being whole. And I realized I was doing it with my son because it was done to me, and my son is a very affectionate, caring person, and I thought that was making him soft. The reality is that my son wasn't soft, my son was whole. And he has the right to be whole and have permission to be whole, and not thinking that sadness and sometimes being afraid or being affectionate and caring isn't in conflict or opposition with your manhood. It just makes you a whole person. And so I think that in conversations with men, it's really looking at your story and have you been handed down a set of skills that actually don't serve you well, or a set of skills that you no longer even need. Because sometimes in how we show up, we're actually carrying baggage that was never ours to begin with. And our manhood was defined by someone else's trauma, and they nurtured us through the lens of their wounds rather than through the lens of wholeness.
I love that. I love that this notion of being whole and that emotional part of it. We were having a conversation with the men yesterday about people often say that men don't communicate. And I have found that may not be entirely accurate. Men communicate in ways that are different. But I'm wondering if this communication and how we think about communication from a gender perspective, if that is a part of this notion of what manhood is that's been handed down, and we're trying to wrestle with all these different ways of being characterized, of living up to a stereotype.
Most of the time, not most of the time, in some instances, it's the environment that you're raised in. We have one of the stories in the book, Kamasi's story was, I wish my dad gave as much to me as he gave to the movement. His dad was present in the home. He was an educator, professor, and involved in social justice, but Kamasi never felt safe. He never felt like he had permission to give voice to what he was feeling. And for many of us, our voices are silenced through how we are raised. I was raised in an environment where you were supposed to be silent. You don't talk when grown folks are talking, and you do not get to have a permission to speak, or don't ever ask why. You cannot be told what to do and ask why, or that was a threat to authority. And so being told to shut up, be quiet, don't ask questions, you are stifling and silencing curiosity. You are telling them that they don't have a right to know why they're being asked to do something. And so that child becomes an adult who is silenced, who doesn't use his or her voice, who plays small in order for other people to dominate and just do as they're told. And then we expect them to be leaders, but we didn't nurture them in a way that equipped them to be leaders. Because when you are allowed to have a voice and ask why and receive an explanation that heightens your curiosity and makes you want to know more, you learn that first at home. You don't go out and learn that from the world. You take into the world what you were equipped with at home. I've heard parents say, shut up, be quiet, just sit there and listen. And then you get out and you introduce your child to someone and the child doesn't say anything. And you're like, speak up. And it's like, you've been telling me to shut up all day. And it just, there's this contradiction in how we expect the child to show up in the world that isn't always in alignment with what we're preparing them to be at home.
Yeah, yeah. It's conflicting messages, particularly for our sons. I think about some folks may be raising boys, and other parents, some parents may be thinking about raising boys, but other parents think about raising men. And those are different kinds of things. And I think those conflicting messages kind of contribute to that, this incompleteness, this lack of wholeness.
And that idea of what it means to be a man, I think we have to realize that there's no one size fits all,
Yeah.
right? That you raise and love your child through the lens of who you see that child becoming. You're not trying to mold your child into your image. And you're not trying to, one of the things I've realized is that oftentimes we parent through the lens of our story, who we were and who we were not. And so in many of our pain points, we parent through the lens of that's not going to happen to my child. And we do not think about who is this person becoming? What type of person is my son or daughter? And how do I love them into becoming who God desires for them to become rather than who I think they should be in the world? And that's a hard place to sit in because it requires you learning to love through the lens of the child's needs, not through the lens of what you think they need.
I'm going to have to pause there because you have enriched us so much today, and I want to encourage everyone to get a copy of the book to unpack a lot of these concepts and tools and notions. Our speaker is going to be bringing the word for us today, and so during our main service. And so I'm curious, sometimes when people speak, you go back and think, man, I wish I would have said this. Are there some things that you want to share with folks in advance of today's service that you'd like for us to know?
That's a good question. I think there are some things I'll be sharing during worship today. But perhaps the key thing that I always want people to take away is to walk away knowing that your story matters. Your story has power in your life to propel you forward or hold you back. And the option of what that looks like is dependent upon your courage to look confidently at your whole truth. Identify its value, offer yourself grace, forgive yourself for the mistakes because you're human, but be determined to take back any power that the past ever took from you, because your story's not over and there's still more in your becoming that you owe to yourself and that the people in your life who love you are waiting to experience from you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so on the horizon, Tuesday, I will be leaving for East Africa for 2.5 months. I will be staying in Nairobi, Kenya on sabbatical, and while there visiting Rwanda, and also going to Uganda to visit Kampala, and then a week in Zanzibar. I love immersing myself in new cultures, pushing myself to see who I become in a new context, in an unfamiliar place, and what God has to show me through experiencing wonder in those new environments. And so that's what I'll be doing next. That's what's coming. I'm working on I Wish My Dad, the next book, which is Daughters and Dads, and setting up those interviews. And people can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram under my name, and YouTube, and all of the various social media platforms under my name, Ramal Toon.
Excellent. Well, we are so excited to hear more from you, and certainly moving into our main service hour to hear what the Lord wants to say to you and through you for the body of Christ. We are thankful to all of you that have joined us today as a part of this conversation hour. Those of you that are streaming with us on social media, we ask that you stick around because every round will go higher and higher. Thank you so much for joining us today in this conversation hour with author and minister Ramal Toon. Thank you so much. God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you peace. Blessings.